Oh, the 1960s. It's like the 1980s, but it's the 1960s. The 60s is a very interesting and disturbing period in America's history. Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, and Robert F. Kennedy have all been assassinated. It is also the birth of new Hollywood cinema. The famous author Norman Mailer tries his hand at making his own movie, called Maidstone. This was produced 1 month after the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy and 3 months after the assassination of Martin Luther King. So why don't people talk about his films then? It's quite simple. His films were shit. Norman Mailer only made 5 movies. However, there are 2 films that stand in infamy for the wrong reasons. The first movie is Tough Guys Don't Dance. It is most known for this scene here.
Guys, you're prepared to kill them.
Oh man! Oh God! Oh man! Oh God! Oh man!
The other film that lives in infamy is a little movie called Maidstone. This video is not going to be a review of Maidstone because what's the point? Maidstone does not even go into the so bad it's good category. It's just boring.
A man of good intention and mediocre performance.
There is absolutely no reason at all to watch Maidstone, except one scene in the film involving Riptorn and Norman Mailer. Watch this.
You crazy fool! You're supposed to die. You must die, not Mailer. I don't want to kill Mailer, but I must kill Kingsley in this picture.
Now, for those who aren't aware of this scene, you may be wondering what just happened. I'll tell you what happened. Famous actor Rip Torn, who was the starring lead in this film behind Norman Mailer, attacked him with a hammer, and it was completely real too. As this video will show you, Maidstone was a film that was meant to appease Norman Mailer's own ego, as the man was a narcissist. And the only thing that people talk about is this infamous scene here. How did it happen though? Well, it's time to find out. Before we talk about the incident at hand, I think it's time we talk about Norman Mailer and Rip Torn individually. Consider this a very quick tale of the tape. The 2 stories I'm going to tell about Norman Mailer are not particularly pleasant, but I feel that I have to tell them just to show you what kind of person that he was. Now, if you've seen my video on Payday, all 2 of you, you may remember me making the remark that Norman Mailer was a terrible human being that kind of deserved to be attacked by Rip Torn. You probably think that I was being a little bit too harsh about this. However, I should clarify, Norman Mailer, as well as being a complete narcissist, was both an infamous alcoholic and a horrific misogynist. Norman Mailer had married 6 times and had 9 children. But let's talk about his second wife, Adele Morales. On the night of November 19th, 1960, Mailer and his wife Morales hosted a party where Norman decided to round up the quote-unquote disenfranchised. Why did Mailer round up the quote-unquote disenfranchised? I'll tell you later. Mailer had invited his friend George Plimpton, who was a journalist, and was hoping to get a Rockefeller to the party, notably David Rockefeller, but this didn't work. Mailer, being very disappointed by this, got very, very drunk. Mailer then proceeded to challenge Plimpton and several others to fight him as the night went south, with a hostile ragtag crowd set in the tone. Mailer then decided to leave the house and did God knows what. Mailer returned at 4:30 a.m. to find that all the guests had left except maybe 5 or 6, and his wife Adele Morales was getting ready for bed. Morales taunted Norman Mailer for basically making a complete ass of himself. Mailer responded to this by stabbing her with a rusty 2.5-inch penknife. Morales nearly lost her life because of this incident, and if it wasn't for those guests that were still at the party, she may have perished. Here is the second story about Norman Mailer. One of Norman Mailer's most well-known feuds is against a man called Gore Vidal. Gore Vidal, at the time, had written a pretty bad review of Prisoner of Sex, which was a new book that Norman Mailer had published. The two came to blows in a certain infamous interview. This interview was on the Dick Cavett Show, and it had Gore Vidal, Norman Mailer, and Janet Flanner, who was a journalist and an American writer. Mailer immediately makes his intentions known. He shakes Dick's hand, he shakes Janet's hand, but he completely ignores Gore. Gore Vidal is not exactly a nice person himself, but he goads Norman into saying his insults, and instead of firing back, he just sits back and basically laughs at him. Norman Mailer was a smart person, but within the entirety of this interview, Mailer uses a lot of big words, but there's absolutely no substance behind what he's saying. He made a complete horse's ass of himself in this interview. Also, for the love of God, don't do a drinking game of the amount of times that Norman says intellectual. You'll be dead in minutes.
Shameless and intellectual or intellectual substance of intellectual pollution. Expert on intellectual games of the intellectual world. You go in for intellectual adulteration. You pollute the intellectual rivers. Intellectually smart. Intellectual pollution. I say that's intellectual muckerism. Gore may bring up everything because the contents of his stomach are no more interesting than the contents of the stomach of an intellectual cow.
We serve food here, sir.
Mailer was so angry at Vidal that for absolutely no reason at all, on this interview, he brings up the fact that he did stab his wife, when from what I understand, Vidal has never mentioned this whatsoever. So once again, this is yet another hole that Norman had dug for himself.
We all know that I stabbed my wife many years ago. We do know that, Gore. You were playing on that. Now,
Who the fuck starts a conversation like that?
You think that's bad? Remember the time Norman Mailer came to our house? Peter, he's trying to kill me.
Flannel at this point has had enough, as she's completely sick of the fact that Vidal and Mailer has basically just ignored everyone else in the room.
Not only in public, but you act as if you were in private. That's the odd way.
It's the art of television, isn't it?
It's very odd that you act as if you were the only people here.
Aren't we?
They are here. He's here. I'm here. I'm becoming very, very bored.
In what is already a very pathetic pissing contest, is made even more embarrassing by the fact that Mailer feels the need to threaten an elderly woman. Dick Cavett is a very impartial interviewer. However, if his buttons have been pushed too much, he will strike back, and here is no exception, as he's also sick of Norman's shit.
Why don't you look at your question sheet and ask a question? Hey, can I talk to the audience for a
Why
moment?
don't you fold it 5 ways and put it where the moon don't shine?
If you think that this interview can't get any more embarrassing, well, you're wrong. Mailer then starts talking to the audience.
Talk to this audience, because this audience has been curiously hostile to me from the word go. I want to ask all of you something. Are you really all truly idiots, or is it me?
Oh, that was the easy answer. Come on.
Mailer proceeds to call them all idiots and continues to have absolutely no self-awareness as he simply doesn't understand why he's being booed. Throughout the interview, Gore, Janet, and Dick get a lot of applause for their wit and their respect for the audience when Norman Mailer either gets no reaction or gets booed, and this clearly pisses off Norman. This leads to several people in the crowd basically shouting back at him that he's been incredibly rude and disrespectful for no reason. It should also be noted that during the recording of the Dick Cavett Show, allegedly Norman Mailer had headbutted Vidal backstage. When Vidal was asked himself why Norman Mailer attacked him, he said the very famous quote, "Once again, words failed Norman Mailer." So you've got the picture. Norman Mailer was a dick. But now let's move on to riptorn. There's a few stories about Riptorn that I could say, like the one time he was so drunk that he broke into a bank thinking it was his house. Instead, I'm going to tell you 2 stories. One of the more famous or infamous Riptorn stories comes from the book Easy Rider's Raging Bulls. Easy Rider was one of the most influential films released in the 1960s in America and was directed by Dennis Hopper, who, quite frankly, deserves his own video based on the amount of stories around him. According to the author, Rip Torn was cast as Hansen in Easy Rider. There are two reasons why Rip Torn lost this role, and here's the first reason. Peter Fonda was also starring in Easy Rider and was having his own issues with Dennis Hopper. Things had gotten a lot worse when Hopper found out that Peter Fonda hadn't started writing yet. This already annoyed Dennis Hopper. Dennis Hopper walked in on Peter Fonda and Rip Torn at a restaurant with a couple of girls and they weren't working. This led to a huge profane rant from Dennis Hopper. Dennis Hopper said something along the likes of, "Things are so rough out there, I couldn't even stop in Texas. They're cutting dudes' hair with rusty razors." Rip Torn, being a Texan, took offense to this. When Rip Torn was talking about this incident, he recalls that he said, take it easy, not everyone from Texas is an asshole." He then proceeded to try and shake Dennis Hopper's hand, and Dennis Hopper refused, and then threatened Rip Torn by saying, "Sit down, you motherfucker." Hopper proceeded to grab a steak knife off the table and threatened Torn with this. Keep this in mind about Rip Torn. He's not exactly what you'd call a pushover. Rip Torn was a member of the Texas A&M University Corps of Cadets, and he even served in the Korean War with the 2nd Infantry Division with the military police. Torn was able to reverse the knife and was able to fend off Hopper. Another person that was present at the time of this fight was Don Carpenter. Don Carpenter says, Hopper had jumped backwards and he exclaimed, "I've got a buck knife, you wanna have a knife fight?" Rip Torn responded by saying, and I quote, "I'll wait for you in the street, bring your guns, bring your knives, bring your pals, and we'll find out in about 3 seconds who the punk is." Elon, take notes. That's how you sound like a tough guy. Hopper would go on to The Tonight Show, and he claimed that he fired Rip Torn because Torn had pulled a knife on him. This pissed Torn off so much that Torn went on to win a $475,000 judgment appeal against Hopper in court for defamation. Here is the second story about Rip Torn. Actor Michael Ironside tells a very interesting story about Rip Torn while the making of Extreme Prejudice, directed by Walter Hill. According to Ironside, Torn was told that he was not needed for 5 days, where he disappeared. He was asked to come back at 11 a.m. on the 5th day. After 4 days had passed, however, nobody had heard anything from Rip Torn, and they were getting very nervous. It's 9 a.m., still no Rip Torn. It's 10 a.m., still no Rip Torn. 10:30, still no Rip Torn. Until a car approaches. Ironside says that this car was completely and utterly destroyed, and there was a driver, and Rip Torn was inside it. Rip Torn, while completely in character, gets out of the car and starts working again on the film. Later on, he joked to Michael Ironside that he really scared everyone into thinking that he wasn't coming back. Ironside asked him where he was in those 5 days. According to Michael Ironside, Rip Torn said this, "Young man, many years ago I lost my virginity to a young lady in Juarez. I think I found her great-granddaughter." That is all he said, and he didn't elaborate further.
I have several questions.
Now, I understand this may sound very tame compared to the other stories, and especially the one I'm about to tell you now, but that doesn't explain the destroyed car. Where was he in those 5 days, and what on earth did he do?
Send you all to jail.
So that is Norman Mailer, and that is Rip Torn. Let's finally move on to the main event of the evening, Maidstone. There are two things that Norman Mailer is known for. On one hand, he is known for being one of the greatest writers of his time. I mean, I haven't read a single one of his books, so I don't know how true that is, but take my word for it. And is also known for being a terrible filmmaker. To clarify, when I say he's a terrible filmmaker, I don't mean subjectively I don't like his films. He genuinely had no idea what he was doing behind the camera, and even Norman admitted this. A director not knowing what he's doing is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, after all, look at everyone's favorite foot fetishist, Quentin Tarantino, or even a Steven Spielberg who never went to film school. However, it is now widely known that Norman Mailer not only didn't have a script, so a lot of the actors had to improvise, but also alcohol and drugs were everywhere without any supervision whatsoever. For this video, I'm mostly quoting the book Overexposed, My First Taste of Filmmaking, written by Michael Mailer, who was the son of Norman Mailer. He tells a few stories in this book, and I don't actually have his book because I'm poor and live in a box, and I record videos with a potato, so I've mostly been seeing this book through Google Books. How true some of these quotes are and stories are, I'm not entirely sure, so keep that in mind. Now, it's time that we discuss the obvious. Why did Riptorn go to such extremes to attack Norman Mailer? Well, it's pretty simple. Norman Mailer was an absolute terror on set.
I will ask none of you to do anything which will completely violate you. On the other hand, I may push several of you to find yourself in emotional and, dare I say it, anatomical situations which will be more intense than any, perhaps, that you've had quite the same way in your life.
Maidstone at times is very difficult to watch, mainly because of Norman Mailer's character. He's obnoxious, he's racist, he's loud, and he's sexist.
In other words, if it were dramatically viable, if I may say, you'd be prepared to take your clothes off.
Yes, I'd love to.
Eagerly, yes.
Yes.
All right, good, my dear. All right, I think we may be able to use you in the movie. Move, please. Listen, you're beautiful, but you know, you do have these deep wrinkles here. You've got to do something about it. You've just got to do something about it. I'd love to use you, but...
I'll try very hard to get rid of them.
I believe that good acting comes out of tyranny, out of a sense of slavery, you understand? You'll be enslaved if you want to be a good actor.
Yeah. Are you socialite?
No.
You've got that sort of very tight thing around the mouth.
But worst of all, though, he's Welsh.
The dominant racial trait was Welsh.
Have you got any more exploding carrots?
Mailer spends this entire movie criticizing the appearances of other women and their facial features. Now, you could forgive this performance because he's just playing a character, but as a reminder, he nearly tried to kill his wife. He does this while not wearing a shirt.
Jack, I want you to draw me like one of your French girls.
Or wearing whatever this is. Also, it is completely pathetic that Mailer basically makes out with a lot of very attractive women on the set of this film when you consider the fact that his wife and kids were on set. Norman Mailer basically played himself on camera and off camera, and when we consider the fact that Mailer was a raging narcissist in real life, you cannot imagine how hard he must have been to work with. There's method acting, and then there's this. It is one thing to play as a fascist dictator on screen, it is another thing to act like a fascist dictator off screen as well.
Fascism, Rota.
To really emphasize the difficulty with working with Norman Mailer, just remember this. Maidstone only runs at 110 minutes. However, due to the amount of drugs on set, and due to the fact that there was no script on the set, so there was a lot of improvisation, just remember that this film was originally 7.5 hours long, and it took so long to cut it down to 110 minutes. 7 hours long with this fat bastard saying big words that have absolutely no meaning to you. I wouldn't have wanted to kill him too. That is a joke, by the way.
I say that's intellectual muckerism.
Hey Norman, you know what I think is intellectual muckerism? You not wearing a shirt. So it's safe to say, everyone, figuratively and literally, wanted to kill Norman on the set of Maidstone. Now, I don't want this video to be just a simple plot synopsis, but let's be honest, about 2 people have seen Maidstone, and in order to give you context on why this incident happened, I have to tell you what the plot is. Norman Mailer basically plays himself, where he plays a character called Norman T. Kingsley, who is supposed to be the quote-unquote American Buñuel, which is an insult to my intelligence. Comparing Norman Mailer to one of the greatest Mexican directors of all time, Louis Buñuel, is the equivalent of me comparing Michelangelo to Chris Chan. Maidstone acts as a documentary, or you could even say a mockumentary about the making of his new film. While doing this, he's also campaigning to become the President of the United States. The filming of Maidstone attracts several journalists, scholars, and African-American radicals to basically question him about his campaign. At the beginning of Maidstone, a group called the High Officials want to ask several questions about Norman T. Kingsley and see what his personality is like. After their questions about Norman Mailer's character have been answered, the High Officials decide to murder him. You think I'm joking, don't you? But who are these people who want to kill Norman T. Kingsley exactly? Well, they're called Prevention of Assassination Experiments, Control.
PAXC. Prevention of Assassination Experiments, Control.
Do I need to tell you why this is a bad film? Maidstone is cut up in 12 different chapters. This leads us to Chapter 10, aka The Grand Assassination Ball. This scene is a party for Norman T. Kingsley's presidential campaign, which is attended by Kingsley's wife and the high officials. This scene concludes in one of the revolutionaries trying to kill Norman T. Kingsley. Now, this may not seem so bad at first, when you realize that this was supposed to be the final scene in the film. Somewhere along the way, the cast were meant to believe that Chapter 10, The Grand Assassination Ball, was to be the final scene of the film where Norman Mailer's character would have been killed. This, however, was not the case. The cast were meant to believe that Norman T. Kingsley's character was going to be killed off in this film, so therefore, that's why Norman Mailer was acting like a complete dickhead on the set of this film. It was supposed to be the final scene of the film, but Norman Mailer had absolutely no intention of killing off his character and had completely misled his crew. So let's think about this realistically. Norman Mailer treated his cast and crew like complete garbage. The entire film consists of him just sitting down without a shirt where he talks a load of bollocks and criticizes women's appearances, and he led the cast to believe that they were supposed to kill his character when this wasn't the instance. As you can imagine, this results in a very, very boring experience that would have had a complete wet fart of an ending.
I trust everyone here completely.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
This is where Riptorn comes in. Riptorn, just like the rest of the crew, was completely puzzled by the lack of resolution in this film. Near the end of the movie, Norman Mailer basically breaks character and breaks the fourth wall, and he asks the crew what they thought of the film and what their experiences were. Norman Mailer, in this speech of his to the crew, tries to convince everyone how great of a filmmaker that he truly is, and how they don't understand what he's really done here. It's pretty embarrassing. One of the actresses says that she was scared by Norman's behavior on set, and the other one even went as far as saying that they'd felt manipulated, exploited, developed, and educated by the Kingsley character. In the words of Norman Mailer, this movie was supposed to be an attack on the nature of reality. His speech to the cast members as well is very similar to his speech to the crowd in his interview on the Dick Cavett Show, in the sense that, again, in both interviews, he has absolutely no self-awareness and tries to tell people how great he is. Mailer had absolutely no self-awareness in his interview on the Dick Cavett Show, where he was confused why people were booing him, and he had no self-awareness at all on the set of Maidstone when he didn't understand why the crew were disappointed with him. Riptorn at this point looks absolutely exhausted. It's not known if it was because he was sick of Norman's pandering, or if he was under the influence of something, but regardless, there is clearly something wrong with Riptorn, as his demeanor has completely changed. Mailer then asks a completely bewildered Riptorn what his thoughts were.
What was your attitude toward me?
Well, I was in a constant conflict between you, Norman, as the man, and the character of Kingsley that you're playing.
When you watch Maidstone and see how this piece of shit movie develops, it is painfully obvious that Riptorn's demeanor completely changes throughout the making of the film. He starts off as an idealistic actor looking for purpose in his character, and then he's completely done with Norman's shit.
It would all come together one way or another. We'll see, but I'm sure it did.
You think it did?
Well, the only surprise I'll have is I end up with styles that are funny incompatible. But I don't believe that's going to happen.
In his book, The Lives of Norman Mailer, the biography, Carl Royalson says this: He had scared people for nothing, another actress observed, and the underlying tone of her remarks suggested many of them had been disappointed by the film's lack of resolution. Mailer thought he had been in control. "You may have some surprises," Ton muttered at what Mailer supposed was the last scene in Maidstone. According to Norman Mailer's biography, which was written by Mary Dearborn, Riptorn felt let down and insulted by the amateurish filmmaking. There had been no real action, only hints of a conspiracy. A climactic assassination ball had failed to produce a spontaneous dramatic resolution. This film was a monument to ego, Norman's ego. The glorious grounds, the magnificent dunes, the weather, the beautiful women, the near-famous actors, all that food and drink, an expensive colour film, all were going to waste. According to Norman Mailer's son, Michael Mailer, as the movie was winding down, Riptorn, who was playing Norman T. Kingsley's ungrateful brother, Raoul, realized that the only way he was going to save the film was by killing Norman T.K., or Norman Mailer on camera. There is another theory that's raised by Richard Bradford, who talks about Norman Mailer in his book, Tough Guy, The Life of Norman Mailer. Drugs and alcohol were consumed from breakfast onwards by all involved, and most began to lose any clear distinction between whether they were in a cinematic representation of a political campaign or part of a real one. Towards the end of the filming, Mailer ordered a group of his actors to become assassins, but by this point, no one seemed certain of their target: the director or the presidential candidate played by the director. Riptorn at this point was sick of Mailer's bullying manner, which was disturbingly similar to the politics of Norman T. Kingsley. If you think Bradford is looking too deep into this, well, just remember something about Norman Mailer. Mailer, in 1969, had actually ran for mayor and had failed to do so. In fact, one of Norman Mailer's parties that he hosted when he was running for the mayor, can you guess when that was? The night he stabbed his wife. Yeah, remember when I said earlier that Mailer rounded up the disenfranchised? Yep, it was all to go to his party where he was running for mayor. Safe to say he didn't win it, and disturbingly, even if we go back to the night where Adele Morales was nearly killed by Norman Mailer, it's a similar situation. Mailer invited several people to a room to convince everyone how great he was, failed miserably, and tried to fight them. In many ways, it's kind of sad. Norman Mailer was still considered to be one of the best authors of his time, and yet that still wasn't enough for him. Royalson put it very well. The psychological reality of Maidstone was the actor's expectation that Mailer would be attacked, and so Ton attacked out of all the plots of other actors and became, Mailer realized, the presence of the film, the psychological reality that became a literal reality out of the pressure of all the ones which did not. In other words, Mailer fucked around and found out. Let us quickly observe the footage of the fight between Riptorn and Norman Mailer. Riptorn attacks Norman Mailer with the hammer, which clearly takes Norman Mailer off guard, even if he was expecting it. Then there's a struggle between the two. Ton and Mailer tell each other to let go of each other, and when it looks like that the fight is going to stop, they keep fighting. How could this possibly get any worse? Norman Mailer's wife and kids were on set when this happened, and they witnessed this. And yes, one of these children happened to be Michael Mailer. This event actually inspired Michael Mailer to get into filmmaking. Again, I couldn't name you a single film that he's done, but be sure to recommend them in the comments so I can ignore your suggestions. Now, at this point, Norman Mailer's wife was present, and it seems like that she didn't know what was going on. His wife probably thought that they were just acting and weren't really fighting. This changes, however, when Rip starts to strangle Norman. Her realization of this leads to her blood-curdling screams and her literally slapping and punching Rip to get off her husband. Her screams then result in her children, who were also present at this time, crying their eyes out. And what's funny in this scene, when Norman Mailer is told to get off Rip, Mailer, like a kid, shouts out, "He's more hurt than me," as if he's offended that Rip got the upper hand on him and wanted to beat him in a fight. This is obviously a testament to how crazy Riptorn had become on the set of this film, but it's also a testament to the ego of Mailer himself. Mailer in real life was known for being an alpha male who loved getting into bar fights, and in the film is constantly sparring with other people on the set, even though it has no purpose in the film. Mailer doesn't seem to care that Riptorn basically busted his head wide open and was more worried with the fact that he was being seen as weak on camera.
But your violence, your love of murder, your celebration of rage, of hate, American dream, what was the dream? A man murders his wife and his woman afterwards to celebrate an American man's dream. This violence, this knocking people down, this carrying on, is a terrible thing. To the extent that one is interested in the way that the society is going, there is quite enough of this stress, quite enough of this violence without what I think are your celebrations of it, your attitude towards women in this thing, which I thought really horrible. And you said I compared you to Charles Manson. I said Henry Miller in his way, Norman in his, and Manson in his far-out mad way are each reflecting a hatred of women and a hatred of flesh.
The dialogue in this attack is also very scary. Sometimes they refer to each other by their characters' names, sometimes they refer to each other by their real names. The line between fiction and reality is truly blurred in this scene. I should note as well that another reason why Riptorn lost his role in Easy Rider is because of this scene in Maidstone. With Dennis Hopper, he was defending himself. But in this instance though, I completely understand why he lost his job. According to Bradford, Mailer did not call the police because he was responsible for the madcap blurring of what is and what is made up, and he accepted the consequences. Mailer obviously sustained a head injury from this incident, and Riptorn's ear was infected after being bitten. Also, do you remember earlier when I said that Riptorn had sued Dennis Hopper? Well, the main reason he won the case is because they used the footage of Maidstone as evidence. And I quote, "He could have not possibly killed Hopper, as he was at the time on the set of Maidstone trying to kill Norman Mailer." Riptorn calls Norman Mailer a fraud, and even if this was supposed to be in the script, Torn 100% believed this.
But anyway, you're just a fraud, aren't you?
I'm a fraud and you're a cocksucker.
Once again, words failed Norman Mailer. Now, again, I don't know if Riptorn was exhausted, on drugs, or just that angry. That is one of the scariest faces I think I've ever seen in my life. This is not acting. There is murder in his eyes. Now, it does seem pretty cut and dry that Riptorn was absolutely sick of Mailer and he attacked him without Mailer knowing he was going to be attacked. But let's play devil's advocate for a second and look into the theory that perhaps Mailer was quote-unquote in on it. It should be noted as well that one of the cameramen on the set of Maidstone is this gentleman here, who is most well known for directing the film Don't Look Back, which is a documentary on Bob Dylan. There is a scene that DA shoots that actually shows Riptorn getting the hammer. There is definitely a possibility that Norman Mailer continuing to quote-unquote destroy the nature of reality probably asked Riptorn to attack him to blur the lines between fiction and reality, and as we've established, clearly didn't give a shit about what his family thought about this. Now, DA, who filmed the actual fight scene between Mailer and Riptorn, even got to know Riptorn a little bit later, and according to him, Riptorn saw a bullshit film and wanted to fix it. It is not known if DA was also on drugs and alcohol at the time, but he keeps filming this. I don't know if he was just as crazy as Mailer or Riptorn, or if the film was so shit that there was nothing interesting to put into it. According to DA, when he filmed this scene, he told Norman Mailer later that he finally has something real in this scene and he wanted to keep it in the film. Norman refused this, but after 4 months of editing the movie, he decided to keep it in. The sad thing is about this attack, Riptorn was right. This did save Maidstone. The only reason people even talk about this film is because a man was nearly killed on it. When the best part of your movie is that the director nearly got killed in it, maybe you failed as a filmmaker, but that's just my opinion. Usually, I would admire someone making a movie because at the end of the day, you're putting your money where your mouth is. Sometimes there is failure in success. But guess what? Tarantino and Spielberg never went out of their way to antagonize the entire crew. Spielberg and Tarantino did not leave booze and drugs everywhere for the actors to do. Quite frankly, even if this scene was supposed to be scripted, or if it was completely out of the blue, the fact that Norman Mailer thought that this was okay to do in front of his family is completely unacceptable. And there's no excuses for Riptorn either. The screams from Mailer's children is absolutely haunting and makes this footage even more disturbing. I love Riptorn, he was the man, but come on, if you really had these feelings about Mailer, you should have taken a deep breath and you should have left that film site as soon as possible. It should have not come to this. After all this though, I think there's a lot of lessons we can learn from Maidstone. Number 1, treat your cast and crew with respect. Number 2, do not feed them with drugs and alcohol. And number 3, if you aren't going to wear a shirt, at least wear a bra.
Get a load of that mountain ranger.
Perhaps you'd like 2 more chairs to contain your giant intellect.
Turn you all to jail.